6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
George Smith didn't want money. Money was useless where he believed the world was headed. But in 1980, he convinced 4 men to walk into a quiet suburban bank with assault rifles and homemade bombs. They weren't there to get rich. They were there to fund the apocalypse. This isn't a story about a bank robbery. This is a story about a prophet who believed he was authorized to start a war. The 1970s in Southern California felt calm on the surface. Sun, sand, surfing, and freeways. But underneath it ran a steady current of fear. Air raid sirens, duck and cover drills in schools, city maps with red circles around target locations. Most people chose to ignore it, but not George Wayne Smith. George wasn't a career criminal. He wasn't a drifter. He was a former U.S. Army soldier stationed in Germany. There, he'd been trained to fire weapons of mass destruction. These were the weapons designed for one purpose and one purpose only: ending everything. In Armageddon. But George didn't just grow up afraid of nuclear war. He trained for it, was briefed on it, was prepared for it. When he returned home to Orange County, California, that anxiety didn't fade. It grew worse. He found a group of like-minded individuals that had a name for it: the Jesus Movement. This group was made up of a strange coalition of counterculture hippies and apocalyptic Christians disillusioned by life and obsessed with the end of the world. This wasn't quiet faith. This was preparation. The book of Revelation wasn't a metaphor. To these guys, it was a roadmap. The Jesus Movement was led by a man named Chuck Smith, who believed the world was nearing its end. And he preached it day after day, week after week, to rooms filled with young, disenchanted converts who already felt the world was broken.
I'm Chuck Smith, and I'm also concerned about man's survival upon this planet.
George Smith listened. He did the math, and the clock pointed to 1 year, 1981. He quickly realized he had less than 12 months to get ready. He moved into a small house in Mira Loma. Plain, ordinary, easy to ignore. To the neighbors, it looked temporary. To George, it was ground zero. He stopped cutting his hair. He stopped looking for work. He started digging. Behind the house, hidden by fences lined with carpet tacks and razor wire, George and his roommate, Chris Harvin, dug into the earth. 12 feet long, 8 feet wide, 10 feet deep. A shelter, somewhere to go when the missiles came. They spent their days down there, smoking dope, drinking, talking about the coming rapture. But a hole in the ground wasn't enough for George. He wanted something bigger, a cabin in the mountains of Utah, a place where the self-righteous could wait out what was coming. But faith doesn't pay for land, and George was broke, unemployed, isolated, his marriage gone, his child gone. In his twisted mind, the rules were already over. If the world was ending in a few months, then money didn't belong to banks anymore. It belonged to the prepared. And for those who weren't prepared, well, they wouldn't survive long enough to matter anyway.
It is a dangerous night in the city of Los Angeles.
George Smith didn't recruit hardened criminals. He recruited men who wanted to believe their lives mattered. Chris Harvin didn't share the religious extremism George Smith was consumed with. In fact, he wasn't really religious at all. He was just lost. It turns out that even before the internet, many people went down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. For Chris, it was the Jupiter effect. This was a dubious idea that a once-in-a-lifetime planetary alignment would happen in a couple of years, and California would slide into the ocean. George may not have been on board with the Jupiter effect stuff, but he loved guys who thought the apocalypse was coming. That was an idea he could work with. Russell Harvin, Chris's younger brother, followed along. Not because he believed California was a goner. Instead, his motivation came from financial desperation and an almost blind allegiance to his older brother. And then there were the Delgado brothers. Manny had been a landscaper alongside George at the Covina Parks Department for nearly 6 years. Over that time, Manny came to take on many of the more extremist views of George. He also needed money. When George proposed the bank robbery plan, Manny was all in. Then there was Billy Delgado. He was just 17 years old, but his body was already being destroyed by a severe case of rheumatoid arthritis. Doctors promised him a wheelchair by age 25. George Smith promised him a reset button. He convinced Billy that only God can cure him, and the coming rapture would burn the sickness right out of him. For a kid in constant pain, the end of the world didn't sound like a tragedy. It sounded like a cure. George didn't tell these guys to rob a bank. He told them to prepare. He showed them books, read sermons, and pointed to prophecy charts that mapped current events to biblical predictions. He told them God always warns a few before the flood. And this time, the warning came with instructions. That preparation required guns. Lots of guns. HK assault rifles, short-barreled AR-15s, shotguns built to launch homemade grenades. Each weapon justified as necessary, not for committing crimes, but for war. They didn't train like professionals. They sat in the living room, passing guns around, imagining scenarios where the system turned on the righteous. What would you do when the police came for God's people? What would you do when the law became the enemy? Fear stopped being a weakness. It became proof. By the time the plan formed, it didn't feel reckless. It felt overdue. George told him the money in the bank wasn't really anyone's anymore, not if the world was ending. God had already repossessed it, and all they had to do was collect it. They believed him, not because he was charismatic, but because his paranoia matched their own. And once belief hardened into commitment, the next step didn't feel like a choice. It felt like destiny. In George Smith's mind, the rapture was supposed to begin with fire. Instead, it began with a fizzle. Before they hit the bank, they planted a diversionary device down the street. It was this homemade IED meant to rupture the gas main and draw every cop in Norco away from the target. Unfortunately for George, things went wrong right from the beginning. He lit the fuse and nothing happened. The fuse had burned out. Convinced this was just a test of their commitment, they drove into the parking lot of the Security Pacific Bank anyway. As they pulled to a stop near the entrance, they quickly realized they had another problem. It was the local chapter of the Cub Scouts. Near the front door was a folding table and a couple of kids selling candy bars. And while you might think supporters of the Jesus movement wouldn't push past Cub Scouts, George Smith did. He shoved a little boy to the side and stormed into the lobby. Inside, everything fell apart immediately. The calm, controlled scenario they envisioned vanished. They screamed obscenities. They threatened to kill everyone. Customers screamed for their lives. But besides the chaos, George faced an even bigger problem. The bank vault was newly empty. They were robbing the place too late in the day. The cash delivery had already come and gone. The money George needed to build his survivalist retreat wasn't there. They were robbing a bank for pocket change.
Riverside's Norco units have a 211 in progress at the Security Pacific Bank, 4th and Hamner.
Manny suddenly noticed something out the window. It wasn't an army. It wasn't even a SWAT team. It was a single Riverside County Sheriff's deputy pulling into the lot. Glenn Belaski assumed it was just another silent alarm, a routine call that always amounted to nothing. He was about to find out exactly how wrong he was. As he rounded the corner, gunfire tore into his windshield, riddling the patrol car with bullets.
Officer hit, clear the air, 1199.
The gunmen didn't run. They stood in the open and unleashed a barrage of gunfire at everything and anything. Bullets were slamming into walls, cars, and storefronts. Belaski threw the car into reverse as bullets pierced through the body of his police cruiser. He was hit in the arm, the shoulder, and the face. Still, he grabbed his shotgun, pumped a round of buckshot into the chamber, and opened fire. Inside the getaway van, Billy Delgado, the youngest of the crew, sat behind the wheel, trying to remain calm, trying to be the guy who gets everyone out of there. The getaway driver, their lifeline, his lifeline. A single pellet of police buckshot shattered that fantasy. It punched through the rear window and hit him in the back of the neck. He didn't die a martyr. He died paralyzed. His foot slipped off the gas. The van drifted forward and slammed into a fence.
350 suspects are stranded, their vehicles disabled, and Hamner and Ford. Throw help, I need an ambulance, I'm bleeding badly.
The so-called Ark was dead. The money was gone. The plan was a total bust. A sane man might have given up at this point, but not George Smith. His fervor had reached a fever pitch. He glanced across the intersection and saw a yellow utility truck stopped in traffic. To anyone else, it was just another work truck. To George, it was his ride to salvation. They dragged the driver out, threw their weapons into the back, and climbed in. As the truck sped away, the robbery may have been finished. But what followed wasn't so much as an escape, but rather a raging gun battle that turned 25 miles of the Riverside suburbs into a war zone. George Smith and what was left of his ragtag crew weren't hiding anymore. They stood in the open bed of a stolen yellow utility truck, firing at everything in sight. They weren't just shooting at the cops. They were firing at civilians, going about their business on a mundane Friday afternoon. A station wagon waiting at a red light. A delivery truck signaling a turn. Commuters sat behind the wheel, listening to the radio, only to have high-velocity rounds ricochet through their windshields. In the back of that yellow truck, George Smith wasn't fighting the police. He was fighting the 20th century. For 25 miles, the suburbs of Riverside became a war zone, where this ragtag survivalist cult battled the entire modern world. Behind them, the Riverside County Sheriff's Department unraveled. Patrol cars were trashed, windshields shattered, radiators blown up.
They're northbound Etiwanda, 63rd. The deputy down Etiwanda and 63rd.
Copy, Etiwanda and 63rd.
Possible they have automatic weapons.
Riverside to responding units. Suspects have automatic weapons.
Dispatch collapsed into chaos. Units shouting over each other. Locations blurring together. No clear perimeter. No command. No idea what was going on or who these guys were.
Russian hammer and flashman. Hit the leg! Where are they going? Quit yelling. Calm down. Which way are they going?
The gunfire spread onto the I-15 freeway, heading north towards the San Gabriel Mountains. Cars got boxed in, drivers ducking below dashboards, glass raining down. When he wasn't spraying gunfire across the highway, George threw homemade beer can bombs from the back of the truck. Some exploded, some didn't. None of them slowed the pursuit. The truck exited the interstate at Sierra Avenue, heading westbound towards Lytle Creek. Lytle was this small, remote community on the eastern portion of the San Gabriel Mountains. It was also where George and the rest of the crew practiced firing their weapons. They knew the area well. It was a narrow road, steep walls, blind curves, and dead ends. A perfect place for an ambush. Leading the chase was Riverside Deputy Jim Evans.
10-4, unit with Evans, advise your location, and are they stationary at that point?
That's a negative. They're moving. We're a quarter mile from the ranger station on Sierra Road in the National Forest. They're firing like crazy.
He drove straight at the gunfire, not because he wasn't afraid, but because someone had to slow these guys down. Evans was carrying a standard-issued revolver. He knew exactly what that meant.
Okay, we got him up here. We had to slow down. He laid a barrage on us at the last curve.
Fortunately, additional backup was on the way. From a neighboring county, Deputy DJ McCarty heard the calls. McCarty was younger, faster, less patient. He understood immediately that a shotgun wouldn't reach men firing assault rifles from a moving truck. So he went to the trunk of a sergeant's car and took out a weapon the department didn't like to talk about. An M16 rifle. It wasn't locked, it wasn't issued, but it was there. As for George Smith, this wasn't an escape anymore. It was momentum. Lytle Creek looked like sanctuary, high ground, isolation, a place to regroup. But to Jim Evans, it looked like something else entirely. A dead end. The pavement ended. The road turned to gravel. The noise of the freeway fell away, replaced by the quiet stillness of the San Gabriel Mountains. George Smith believed the canyon led to salvation, that if they climbed high enough, the world couldn't reach them. Unfortunately for George, geography doesn't care about belief. 4 miles up, the road disappeared, a washout. The truck grounded to a stop. There was nowhere left to drive. They didn't panic. They didn't argue. They got out and took positions behind the truck and waited. Dust filled the canyon as Deputy Jim Evans rounded the blind curve. Rifle fire suddenly erupted from the hillside.
Okay. Jim, talk. Evans, you there?
The windshield shattered. Evans had bailed out and dropped behind the open driver's door. He drew his gun and fired all 6 rounds from his .38 revolver. Meanwhile, another patrol car slid to a stop behind him. It was Deputy Jim McPherron and DJ McCarty. McPherron, seeing Evans in a gunfight, immediately dove from the driver's seat and scrambled to the back of the squad car for cover. McCarty could see Evans in the open, firing toward the slope. He later testified that for 10 to 15 seconds, he stayed inside his vehicle, frozen in disbelief at the apocalyptic violence unfolding in front of him. The canyon had a way of distorting everything. The crack of the rifle shots echoed off the rock walls. Dust swallowed the muzzle flashes. He couldn't tell how many there were or from which direction they were shooting. McCarty stared out the windshield as Evans kept firing. Then it stopped. A single round struck Evans in the head. He fell immediately. McCarty was still seated inside the car when it happened, paralyzed by what he was witnessing. Then, reality broke in. A round struck McCarty in the elbow. Bullets tore into the passenger side of the car. He crawled across the bench seat and spilled out the open driver's door. As he laid on the ground, he suddenly realized he left the M16 inside the vehicle. He reached back up, dragged it out, and tried to chamber a round. Only then did McCarty return fire towards the hillside. But by then, it was too late. Jim Evans was already dead. The gunfire faded. The men above slipped into the brush.
Tower 229, can you copy?
Tower 229, go ahead.
We request that you maintain minimum traffic. We have a very hazardous situation on Sierra. We've got a shuttle officer shot, so we don't know what the status is. Doug Jackson, emergency traffic.
10-4, all units, minimum traffic, even on emergency, reference Sierra Avenue.
Later, investigators concluded the fatal shot came from Manny Delgado, who was positioned on the hill. But in the dust and echo of that canyon, no one on that road saw the exact moment the bullet left the barrel. Only that it had, and it was over. Night settled over Lytle Creek, and with it came the cold. George Smith had prepared for nuclear fire. He hadn't prepared for freezing rain. In the pitch black of the canyon, survival instincts had finally overridden loyalty. Bleeding and unable to keep pace, George had been left behind by his own disciples. As the temperature dropped, his adrenaline drained away. The man, who once fancied himself as a soldier of God, now lay shivering in the mud, wounded, soaked, and alone. Below them, the police response had changed. This was no longer a chase. It became a manhunt. SWAT teams moved through the trees. Helicopters traced the canyon walls with lights. No shouting, no warnings. Just a dragnet closing in. George Smith woke up face down in the dirt. He wasn't a prophet anymore. He was just a frightened man bleeding from a shotgun wound to his leg. Alone, dehydrated, and unable to even stand. When officers found him, he didn't resist. He gave up and pleaded for a drink of water. The man who said he would never be taken alive was loaded into a helicopter and flown down the mountain. Russell Harvin and his brother Chris both quickly followed and surrendered quietly. The only man still hiding was Manny Delgado. He'd already watched his younger brother die in that van. He'd kept firing at the cops until his weapon was empty. Now, he laid alone in the thicket, listening to the rain and waiting for the inevitable. When the search team spotted him, they didn't hesitate. Gunfire tore through the brush, and his life ended quickly. By morning, the canyon was quiet. The army of the apocalypse was finished. All that remained of these self-anointed soldiers of God were 3 men in handcuffs and 2 men in body bags. The trial began in June 1981. It was expected to be brief. It wasn't. It was immediately bogged down by defense motions in what became the longest jury selection process in California history, lasting nearly 6 months. The prosecution began in January 1982 by laying the weapons out on the courtroom floor. Rifles, homemade grenades, thousands of rounds of ammunition. There was so much of it that attorneys had to step around the pile to reach the witness stand. But there, in the fluorescent light, the arsenal didn't look powerful. It looked extreme. George Smith and the others didn't plead insanity. They didn't apologize. Instead, they tried to change the narrative. Chris Harvin took the stand first. He claimed he hadn't really been involved. He said the plan wasn't even George's. He pointed the finger towards a sixth bank robber, the mastermind of the operation. Not Kaiser Soze, but a man just as mysterious. A man by the name of Jerry Cohen. Chris went on to describe Cohen in detail. His build, his voice. He said Cohen had pushed them into the robbery and that he'd somehow disappeared during the chase. No record of Jerry Cohen was ever found. No witness placed him at the scene. The prosecution referred to him as a phantom, a red herring the defense hoped would confuse the jury. Chris wouldn't let the story go. But honestly, without it, he didn't have much of a defense. Then George Smith testified. He brought a Bible with him. He didn't talk about the bank, or the chase, or the deputy who was killed. Instead, he read from the book of Revelation. He talked about prophecy, about preparation, about the pending doom of it all. He went on to explain that he wasn't a criminal. He was a survivalist. He said the pit in his backyard was a shelter, not a fortress. He said he just wanted to save people, not hurt them. He spoke calmly, confidently, as if the courtroom were still his congregation, as if this was just some sort of big misunderstanding that could be straightened out once they heard his side of the story. But the jury didn't see a prophet. What they saw was a delusional doomsayer who had planned a brazen robbery, sprayed bullets into innocent bystanders, and watched a deputy die. After 15 days of deliberation, the verdict came back. Guilty on all counts. Life without the possibility of parole. Both the Harvin brothers got similar sentences. Outside the courthouse, time moved on. 1981 passed, then 82. The planetary alignment came and went. California didn't fall into the ocean. No one shot missiles at each other, or at least none with nuclear warheads. And even though the world may not have ended, George Smith's did. In the end, the system locked George Smith and his followers away, quick to dismiss them as violent extremists. After all, it's a lot more comforting to label them criminals in a civilized world than to admit they were its inevitable consequence. But if you take a step back, if you look at the institutions that built them, a different, quieter horror emerges. This was a generation raised in the shadow of the mushroom cloud. As children, they sat in classrooms and were taught duck and cover drills to survive an atomic blast. We filled their television sets with imagery of the Red Menace. We built movies around the specter of nuclear annihilation. We told them every single day that the end of the world wasn't just possible, but imminent. And then somehow, we expected young men like George Smith to simply ignore it. Smith's crimes were monstrous. He and his cohorts got what they deserved. The death of James Evans, a horrific tragedy. But his underlying paranoia, his belief that the system was collapsing and he needed an arsenal to survive it, that wasn't some paranoid delusion. That was exactly what the government had been telling him his whole life. George Smith didn't invent the apocalypse. He just believed in it. He took the terror that society peddled to him, and he acted on it. And for doing exactly what he was taught to do, society threw him in a cage and tossed away the key. That's the true sociological horror. We create the monsters, and then we pretend we don't recognize them.